The ballroom of Hawthorne Manor shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers, their golden light reflecting from polished marble floors and gilded mirrors. Noble guests filled the vast room, their laughter blending with the music of a string quartet stationed near the grand staircase. It was an evening designed to celebrate the prosperity of the duchy, and every influential family within 50 miles had arrived to witness it. At the center of the gathering stood Duke Alexander Hawthorne. At 30 years old, Alexander possessed everything society admired. Wealth, title, intelligence, and authority seemed to follow him effortlessly. His dark hair was neatly styled, his posture impeccable, and his expression carried the confidence of a man accustomed to obedience. Servants hurried when he spoke. Politicians sought his approval. Landowners respected his judgment. Beside him stood his wife, Hawthorne. At 24 was striking in a quieter way. She wore a sapphire gown that complemented her gentle features, and her chestnut hair was arranged with careful elegance. Yet despite her beauty, she always seemed to occupy less space than she deserved, as though years of self-doubt had taught her to make herself smaller. The evening had proceeded smoothly, until a prominent countess complimented recent charity efforts. "I hear the new schoolhouse was your idea, Your Grace," the woman said warmly. "The villagers speak very highly of it." Several guests nodded in agreement. Smiled modestly, "I only helped organize the project." Before anyone could continue, Alexander gave a short laugh. "My wife enjoys keeping herself occupied," he said. The remark sounded harmless at first. Then he added, "Though enthusiasm alone does not make one duchess material." The surrounding conversation died instantly. Silence spread through the group. Felt every eye turned toward her. For a brief moment she thought Alexander might correct himself, perhaps offer a reassuring smile or soften the statement. Instead, he calmly sipped his wine. A few uncomfortable guests glanced away, others pretended not to have heard. The countess quickly changed the subject, but the damage had already been done. Maintained her composure through the remainder of the evening. Years of practice had taught her how. She smiled when expected, she greeted guests politely, she thanked visitors for attending, yet beneath the surface, humiliation burned through her chest. When the final carriage departed and the manor grew quiet, she returned to her chambers with measured steps. The silence of the room felt heavier than any crowd. She stared at her reflection in the mirror. "Not Duchess material." The words echoed relentlessly. 3 years earlier, when she had married Alexander, she had imagined a very different life. Their union had been arranged through family connections, but had entered the marriage willingly. Alexander had seemed reserved rather than cruel, disciplined rather than cold. She had believed affection would grow with time. Instead, she spent 3 years chasing approval that never arrived. Whenever she mastered one expectation, another appeared beyond reach. When she learned estate management, he pointed out her lack of political influence. When she improved social relations among neighboring families, he criticized her public speaking. When she organized successful charitable programs, he claimed genuine nobility could not be learned. No accomplishment ever seemed enough. At first, she blamed herself. Perhaps she truly lacked something essential. Perhaps she simply needed to work harder. Those beliefs drove her to endless effort. She studied etiquette books late into the night. She practiced speeches before mirrors. She memorized the names of tenants, merchants, and local leaders. She attended meetings, supervised projects, and represented the duchy whenever necessary. The people around her appreciated those efforts. Alexander never did. A knock interrupted her thoughts. She turned to find Alexander standing in the doorway. His expression remained unchanged. "We should discuss tonight," she said quietly. He entered without objection. The room seemed colder with him inside. "What exactly did you mean?" asked. Alexander looked mildly confused. "About what?" Her hands tightened. "You know what." Understanding flickered across his face. "The ballroom comment." "Yes." Alexander sighed as though addressing a minor inconvenience. "You are taking it too personally." "Too personally," she repeated. It was the truth. The words struck harder than the original insult. Stared at him. "Then tell me," she said, "what have I failed to do?" Alexander folded his arms. "You lack natural authority." She waited. "You lack social instincts." Another pause. "And despite your efforts, you do not possess the qualities expected of a duchess." The finality in his voice shattered something inside her. For years she had hoped he simply failed to notice her efforts. Now she understood. He noticed. He simply did not value them. "Nothing I do will ever change your mind, will it?" she asked. Alexander remained silent. His silence was answer enough. After a moment he turned toward the door. "We should get some rest." Then he left, stood motionless long after he disappeared. The hurt gradually gave way to something unexpected. Clarity. For 3 years she had measured her worth through Alexander's approval. For 3 years she had accepted every criticism as motivation to improve. For 3 years she had exhausted herself trying to become the woman he wanted. Yet that woman did not exist. No matter how much she changed, the finish line always moved farther away. The realization was strangely freeing. The next morning made a decision. She stopped asking Alexander's opinion about her projects. She stopped seeking opportunities to impress him. She moved into a suite of rooms located in another wing of the manor, under the practical excuse of needing additional workspace. Most importantly, she stopped waiting for affection that never came. Weeks became months. Life settled into a new rhythm. Without constant disappointment weighing on her, discovered a quiet sense of peace. She devoted herself to meaningful work and spent less time worrying about Alexander's judgments. The change was subtle but unmistakable. She smiled more often. She laughed occasionally. Her confidence grew in ways she barely noticed herself. Alexander noticed. At first he welcomed the distance. Then he began observing strange differences. No longer looked toward him during dinners. She no longer searched his face for approval after successful events. She no longer seemed disappointed by his indifference. One autumn afternoon, he entered the library unexpectedly. Sunlight streamed through tall windows. Sat alone beside the fireplace. For a moment, Alexander paused. She was smiling. Not the careful smile she wore in public. A genuine one. In her hands rested a letter. The expression on her face revealed warmth he had not seen in years. Then she noticed him. Quickly, she folded the letter and slipped it inside a book. The smile vanished. Not from fear. Not from embarrassment. Simply because she no longer felt any need to share it with him. As Rose and quietly left the room, Alexander found himself staring after her. For reasons he could not explain, he suddenly wanted to know who had written that letter. Alexander could not explain why the image lingered in his mind. For days after seeing Hyde the letter, he found himself recalling the expression on her face. It had not been the polite smile she offered guests or the restrained courtesy she showed servants. It had been genuine happiness, effortless and unguarded. The realization unsettled him. For years he had viewed his wife through a narrow lens of expectations. He noticed her shortcomings because he expected them. He cataloged flaws because he believed improvement was her responsibility. Yet recently, whenever he looked at her, the woman before him seemed different from the one he thought he knew. The change became impossible to ignore as winter gave way to spring. Devoted herself to projects throughout the duchy with renewed energy. She expanded educational programs for village children and organized support for struggling families. Her presence became increasingly visible across the estate. More importantly, people responded to her. When she visited schools, children rushed to greet her. When she attended village meetings, residents listened attentively. When she offered suggestions, local leaders welcomed them. She earned respect without demanding it. Alexander began hearing her name everywhere. At first, he dismissed the praise as exaggeration. Then he started paying attention. One afternoon, he passed through the village square while returning from a meeting. Several merchants were discussing recent improvements to local roads. "The Duchess pushed that proposal forward," one man said. "Best decision this estate has made in years," another replied. Their admiration was sincere. Alexander continued walking, but the conversation followed him. He could not remember the last time anyone spoke of him with such warmth. Several weeks later, a new project brought an unfamiliar face to Hawthorne Lands. Reed arrived to oversee the restoration of several historic buildings owned by the estate. At 32, possessed an easy confidence that immediately distinguished him from the aristocrats Alexander usually encountered. He was neither noble nor wealthy by birth, but years of success as an architect had earned him respect throughout the region. His reputation rested upon talent rather than title. The first time met him, they spent nearly an hour discussing plans for a neglected community hall. Alexander happened to witness part of the conversation from a distance. What struck him was not the discussion itself. It was demeanor. She appeared relaxed, comfortable, animated, listened carefully whenever she spoke. Instead of interrupting or dismissing her ideas, he considered them thoughtfully before responding. Their exchange resembled a partnership rather than a lecture. Seemed to flourish under that simple respect. As restoration work progressed, their paths crossed frequently. They toured properties together, reviewed plans, discussed community needs. Servants occasionally mentioned seeing them in conversation. Nothing improper occurred, yet rumors emerged all the same. People noticed how naturally they interacted. The gossip eventually reached Alexander. His immediate reaction surprised him. Irritation. He told himself the feeling stemmed from concern for appearances. A duchess attracted scrutiny, and public speculation could damage reputations. The explanation sounded reasonable. It also felt incomplete. One afternoon, he arrived unexpectedly at a charity gathering held in the estate gardens. Guests mingled among flower beds while musicians played softly nearby. Tables displayed plans for future projects benefiting surrounding villages. Alexander searched the crowd for local officials. Instead, his attention fixed upon. She stood beneath a flowering tree speaking with. Neither seemed aware of anyone else. Plucked a small blossom from a nearby branch and offered it to her after making some remark Alexander could not hear. Laughed. The sound carried faintly across the garden. For a moment, she looked younger than her years. Vria smiled in response. The exchange lasted only seconds. Yet something tightened sharply inside Alexander's chest. He turned away before either of them noticed him. The discomfort remained long after the event ended. That evening, he found himself packing his study. The image replayed repeatedly. Her laughter, the tension, the ease between them. Alexander attempted to dismiss it. Instead, memories surfaced unexpectedly. He remembered eagerly presenting plans for charitable programs during their first year of marriage. He remembered her asking for his advice on estate matters. He remembered the countless occasions she sought conversation only to receive brief responses. At the time, he considered those interactions unimportant. Now they returned with uncomfortable clarity. Days later, curiosity drove him toward answers. He began reviewing estate records personally. Documents filled shelves in his office, detailing years of financial decisions, construction projects, and administrative changes. As he examined reports, a pattern emerged. His involvement appeared everywhere. Programs that reduced poverty, initiatives that improved education, negotiations that resolved local disputes. Many successful projects carried her influence. Some had saved the estate considerable expense. Others strengthened relationships throughout the region. Several achievements Alexander vaguely remembered criticizing had ultimately benefited the duchy significantly. The discovery left him unsettled. How much had he overlooked? Seeking further confirmation, he questioned senior staff members. Their responses proved remarkably consistent. The housekeeper praised kindness toward servants. The steward admired her practical judgment. Local administrators described her as fair and dependable. None spoke of her out of obligation. Their respect was genuine. Alexander listened in growing silence. The woman he spent years judging appeared completely different through the eyes of everyone else. One evening, he attended a village event without formal announcement. As he moved among the crowd, conversations paused respectfully. Yet after he passed, discussions resumed. Again and again, he overheard praise directed toward. Not because she was a duchess, because she had earned it. The realization struck with unexpected force. She had become exactly what the duchy needed. Perhaps she always had been. Only one person had failed to recognize it. Him. That truth followed Alexander for days. He watched more carefully than before. Not with criticism, with observation. He noticed how patiently she listened when others spoke. How confidently she handled problems. How naturally people trusted her. Qualities he once dismissed now appeared impossible to ignore. For the first time, he questioned his own judgment. The shift disturbed him more than he cared to admit. Late one evening, he happened to glance through a manor window overlooking the front courtyard. A carriage waited near the entrance. Stood beside it, accompanied him down the steps after a meeting regarding restoration plans. The fading sunlight cast long shadows across the stone drive. They paused beside the carriage, said something that made her smile. Not the cautious smile she reserved for formal occasions. The genuine one Alexander had seen in the library months earlier. After a brief exchange, bowed respectfully, thanked him. There was nothing inappropriate in their farewell. Nothing scandalous. Nothing a reasonable man could object to. Yet as entered the carriage and watched him depart, Alexander experienced a feeling far more troubling than jealousy. Veer, for years he had assumed, would always remain where he left her, patiently waiting for scraps of attention. Now he saw a different possibility. She was building a life that no longer revolved around him. And standing alone at the window, Alexander realized with growing certainty that if he did nothing, he might lose his wife long before another man ever tried to claim her. Fear proved far more difficult to ignore than jealousy. For weeks after watching Bid farewell to Reed, Alexander carried a growing sense of unease. Every attempt to dismiss it failed. He could no longer pretend his wife's independence was merely a passing phase, nor could he convince himself that his concerns centered solely on appearances. The truth was becoming impossible to escape. He missed her. Not simply her presence at dinners or social events, but the person he had spent years overlooking. The realization arrived gradually, then all at once. Every memory he revisited seemed stained by his own arrogance. He remembered dismissing her ideas before hearing them fully. He remembered criticizing achievements others admired. He remembered the countless moments she had approached him with hope in her eyes. Each memory ended the same way, with him pushing her farther away. One evening, unable to endure his thoughts any longer, Alexander entered the estate library. The room was quiet except for the ticking of a clock near the fireplace, sat reading beside a window, completely absorbed in her book. She looked up when he approached. Her expression remained polite but guarded. The distance between them felt greater than the width of the room. "May I speak with you?" he asked. "Close the book." "Of course." Alexander sat across from her. For perhaps the first time since their marriage, he found himself uncertain. "I owe you an apology." A flicker of surprise crossed her face. She remained silent. "I have spent years judging you unfairly," he continued. "I convinced myself that I understood what this duchy required. I was wrong." Listened carefully. "I have discovered how much of this estate's success exists because of your efforts," he said. "More importantly, I have begun to understand how poorly I treated you." The words sounded inadequate even as he spoke them. Years of hurt could not be erased by a few sentences. Looked toward the window before answering. "Do you know what hurt most?" Alexander shook his head. "It was never the criticism." Her voice remained calm. "It was believing that no matter how hard I tried, you had already decided who I was." The statement struck with painful accuracy. She had not failed him. He had failed her. For years he viewed her through assumptions rather than reality. "I know that now," he said quietly. Met his gaze. "Knowing it now does not change the years before." Alexander lowered his eyes. She was right. No explanation existed. No excuse could justify his behavior. When he left the library that evening, he understood something important. If trust could be repaired, it would happen slowly. He would have to earn it. The following weeks marked the beginning of that effort. Alexander stopped offering criticism where none was needed. He listened during meetings instead of dominating them. When proposed improvements to estate operations, he supported them openly. His actions were not dramatic. They were consistent. For the first time, he treated her as an equal partner. Noticed. She also remained cautious. Experience had taught her not to trust change too quickly. Meanwhile, continued overseeing restoration projects across the estate. His friendship with remained warm but respectful. Unlike the rumors suggested, neither had crossed boundaries. One afternoon, met near the restored community hall. The project was nearly complete. As workers finished their tasks nearby, he studied her thoughtfully. You seem troubled, he observed. Smiled faintly. Do I? You do. She considered denying it. Instead, she sighed. Alexander has changed. Nodded. I have noticed. I don't know whether to trust it. His expression softened. That is understandable. They walked slowly along the path beside the building. After a moment, spoke again. Whatever happens, make your decision based on what brings you peace. Glanced at him. You make it sound simple. It isn't. He smiled. But happiness rarely follows pride, it follows honesty. His words stayed with her long after the conversation ended. As summer approached, preparations began for the annual Hawthorne Ball, the largest social event of the season. Nobles, politicians, and influential families from neighboring counties planned to attend. The event carried enormous significance. For Alexander, it also represented an opportunity. The evening arrived beneath clear skies and pleasant weather. Hundreds of guests filled the manor. Music drifted through magnificent halls while conversations echoed beneath sparkling chandeliers. Moved gracefully among visitors. Unlike previous years, she no longer worried about meeting impossible expectations. She simply carried herself with quiet confidence. Alexander watched her from across the ballroom. For once, he saw her clearly. Not as a list of flaws. Not as a woman struggling to become worthy. But as the person she had always been. When the time came for formal remarks, the crowd gathered expectantly. Alexander stepped forward. The room gradually fell silent. Many anticipated a speech celebrating estate achievements. Instead, Alexander turned toward. A murmur spread through the audience. His voice carried across the ballroom. For years, this duchy has prospered because of dedication, wisdom, and compassion. Guests nodded politely. Then he continued. I would like to acknowledge the person responsible for much of that success. Every eye shifted toward. She stood motionless. Alexander drew a steady breath. When I married my wife, I believed leadership depended upon status, influence, and authority. His gaze never left hers. I was mistaken. Silence filled the hall. The person who strengthened our communities, improved our schools, supported our people, and earned their trust was. Several guests exchanged surprised glances. Others smiled knowingly. Alexander spoke the next words without hesitation. The finest thing about this duchy was never its title. Emotion tightened his voice. It was its duchess. The room erupted into applause. Remained still, not because she disliked the praise, because she understood what it had cost him to offer it. For the first time, he had publicly admitted his failure. The applause eventually faded. The evening continued. Later, away from the crowd, Alexander found standing on a terrace overlooking the gardens. The warm night air carried the scent of flowers. For a moment, neither spoke. Finally, Alexander broke the silence. I meant every word. I know. Her answer surprised him. You do. She nodded. I can see that you've changed. Hope stirred inside him. Then she added gently, but trust isn't rebuilt in one evening. The hope remained. Not because she forgave him. Because she had not rejected him. I understand, he said. And I am willing to wait. Studied him carefully. For once, she found no arrogance in his expression. Only sincerity. Months passed. Alexander continued proving himself through actions rather than promises. Gradually, barriers between them began to weaken. Conversations became easier. Laughter returned. Partnership replaced distance. When completed his final restoration project, he prepared to leave Hawthorne Lands. On his last day, he met near the manor entrance. You helped change this estate, she told him. Smiled. I think the estate changed itself. They shared a brief farewell before he departed. Watching the carriage disappear down the road, felt gratitude rather than regret. Had entered her life at the exact moment she needed perspective. Nothing more. Nothing less. Several weeks later, she walked through the manor gardens with Alexander beside her. The afternoon was peaceful, sunlight filtering through trees as they followed a winding path. For a while, they simply enjoyed the quiet. Then Alexander spoke. Seeing you with another man forced me to confront everything I refused to see. Glanced at him. And what did you learn? He smiled. That the woman I claimed wasn't Duchess material was the best thing that ever happened to this duchy. His answering smile carried warmth, forgiveness, and the promise of something stronger than either had expected. This time, as they continued forward together, neither of them looked back.